Welcome to Raising the Bar, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the country's most successful leaders and how they elevate their business and their teams. Please welcome our host, Alison DePauli.
Welcome, everybody, to the next edition of Raising the Bar, where we talk with business leaders, CEOs, CFOs, founders who have raised the bar in their professional lives. And my guest today, Arnette Heintze, has certainly done that. Quite an interesting background. We're going to talk about all things that happened even back in 1968, all the way to what S2 Verify can do for employers today. Arnette, thank you for being with me today.
Alison, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to helping you raise the bar here.
Thank you. I hear that LSU accent now. So you have such an interesting journey to me. You know, you graduated from LSU in 1968, I believe. You went to law enforcement and then you ended up with the Secret Service, and you have quite the career with the Secret Service before pivoting into private security. How did that all happen?
Well, it does go back to 1968, but I was 13 at the time. So it was June 6, 1968. And my father had retired from the Marine Corps, brought our family down to South Louisiana to raise us. And I was out cutting grass in my summer job. And I came home that evening, and like every evening, my father watched the Walter Cronkite Evening News. And I remember coming in that day, and I heard Walter Cronkite say, and the president has dispatched the Secret Service to protect the remaining presidential candidates. Well, didn't know what Secret Service was at all, had never heard of them in my life. So I ran to Google, and we know that didn't exist back then, but I ran to the World Book encyclopedias, those little white, beige, and green encyclopedias that many people had. And my mother had just purchased those for the family. And I looked up Secret Service, and I read that, and I said, that's what I want to do in life. So I knew on that day, that's where I wanted to focus my attention, because I felt a calling to it. And kind of fast forward, I met my first Secret Service agent in 1971. And he was actually married to my best friend's older sister in high school. And I spent a Christmas Eve talking with him about the Secret Service. And he was telling me about traveling around on Air Force One, carrying machine guns. And I said, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. So I finished high school in 73 and then went on to LSU. And at the time, I had a cousin who was a sociology professor at LSU. And he said, hey, the law enforcement program is kind of new and just starting. He said, I would suggest starting in another curriculum. So I started in international trade and finance and almost flunked out of college. So I said, you know what, regardless of how advanced the law enforcement program is, I'm going to go back into that. And so I switched my major, and just had a wonderful time the next 3 years at LSU. And finished with a bachelor's degree in law enforcement. And at the time, President Carter was in office, and interest rates were 21%. And there wasn't a lot of hiring in the federal government. So I in talking with some mentors, they suggested I go in local law enforcement. So I did that. So I covered the ranks of local law enforcement. I spent 13 months as a Baton Rouge City police officer. That was my first job out of college. Then I went on to be an investigator with the Louisiana Attorney General, investigating Medicaid fraud, and then on to the state police, and had a fabulous career with the state police, where I had decided if I didn't get called by the Secret Service by the time I was 28, I was going to stay with the state police.
What was the magic number of 28?
I thought my life was moving forward, and I was having so much fun with the state police. I was one of 45 detectives and working some tremendous cases. And I just thought, you know what, if I don't hear from them, I'm going to stay with state police. And a guy named Jimmy Taylor called me 2 weeks before I turned 28 and offered me a job. Jimmy was the special agent in charge of the Secret Service in New Orleans. And if anybody has seen the assassination attempt of Governor George Wallace when he's running for president, there was an assassin by the name of Arthur Bremer. And Jimmy was the agent in charge of that detail. And you could see him swatting down with his arm to grab the gun after, he shot Governor Wallace. So that's the gentleman that hired me in the Secret Service. And I went on to have a 20-year career there. But I will tell you other issues that I can track that influenced my career also involved the presidential assassination attempt on President Reagan. That was April 30th, 1981. And then following that brought, Congress to the point where they just threw tons of money at the Secret Service and said, you gotta hire more. So I was in that very first big group of agents that got hired. And so that really impacted my career. And with the Secret Service, that it was just a tremendous career. And one of the key strengths of the Secret Service is it's the way they approach the job. It's with a prevention-oriented mindset and a prevention methodology. So to stop bad things from happening. And there is a way to secure just about everything in life. And you take acceptable risk. And so the world around protection is making sure you address the risks, threats, and vulnerabilities, which you could carry on to any business today, which is what you need to do in building a security strategy. So I spent time in the Secret Service. I started off in New Orleans, opened an office in Baton Rouge, went to New York City for a few years in the late 80s, and then on down to President George Herbert Walker Bush's detail in December of 90. So I served on the president's detail, and it's called the Presidential Protective Division. And you're part of the men and women that have to be within arm's reach of the president at all times. We're there to cover and evacuate and protect the president.
Did you ever run with Mr. Bush at American University?
I don't know whether I did at American University, but I've run with him plenty in Washington, D.C.
He used to run at AU. We used to watch them every once in a while.
He loved to run. It was just something that it brought him freedom and peace of mind, and it was something that he enjoyed doing. So you have to be prepared. And of course, when you run with a president, it's not like you're out for a good exercise. You better be in shape because you're carrying a gun, you're carrying handcuffs, you're wearing a bulletproof vest, you've got a radio on. So there's a lot of things going on for the agents when they're running with the president. And so I served the last 2 years of President Bush's detail. Then President Clinton gets elected, and then I served on the first 2 years of his administration. Now, President Clinton was a very significant runner. He could fly. And so spent the first 2 years of his administration before going to our headquarters, where I worked in our liaison division. I ran our public affairs office for a number of years. And then had the opportunity to go to the National War College as the Department of Treasury's representative to the War College. And
how did you end up as the Department of Treasury's representative?
The director of the Secret Service at the time, who was a good friend of mine, his name was Lou Merletti. And Lou had always wanted to go to the National War College too. So I was working closely with Lou at the time, running our public affairs office. And it was the time the Independent Counsel was investigating President Clinton. So it was a very intense period of time. And I literally, you were working 16, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was just month after month after month. And then I finally saw an announcement that the War College was preparing to receive candidates. Most of the candidates to go to the War College are military. 75% are ranking military officers.
But I think people are always very surprised to hear that it's not 100%. And it hasn't been for very long.
No, as a matter of fact, it never has been, to my understanding. There's always about a 25% civilian population, which is civilian federal executives. So you're somebody that the federal agencies have in their senior executive ranks. And so I went to the director. I said, I've got to, I really like to go. He calls the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary Rubin at the time, and said, I've got a candidate. I'd like to see him get selected. And I got selected. So it was a year program and probably the most intense learning environment I've ever been in. And it was just tremendous. And you finish after 12 months, you finish with a Master's of National Security Strategy degree. And so I finished that. And then the Secret Service shipped me off to Chicago to run the Midwest of the Secret Service. But it was while I was in the mid 90s, when I was in our public affairs office, that I first had the thoughts of getting into the entrepreneurial ranks. I started thinking about how could I bring the skill set I have from the Secret Service into a commercial environment and protect people, places, property, and assets. And I started thinking about that. And lo and behold, another date becomes very prominent to me, which is September 11th. And at that time, I picked up a journal and I started writing the thoughts I had around creating a business. I still have that journal today. And it's amazing to see the number of things that I was able to take from that early journal and bring it into a business environment.
Quite a successful business environment.
It turned out. And the reason it was successful is because of the people that raised their hand and said, I'll join you in this journey to see what we can do together. So it was really all about the people. And, at the time I was going to start it with all men and women from the Secret Service. I thought there was nobody else better experienced that. But then one day I realized there's no diversity of thought, experience, ethnicity to some level. So it brought me to a colleague of mine who was the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, a gentleman by the name of Terry Hillard. And Terry had been calling me over some advice on some consulting opportunities he had. And then I finally said, Terry, let's go to lunch. And I went to lunch, gave him my business plan. I said, let's start this company. I said, let's call it Hillard Heintze, because Heinz Hillard didn't sound right. And I said, look, if you got any money, let's throw some money in. I'll open a checking account. Each of us wrote a $3,000 check. That's the only money that company ever took. And we built the company from that point forward. And I don't want to take credit for all of that, of building it from there, because there's a lot of good luck that has to happen when you're building a business. And as long as you're hiring great people that believe in your purpose, believe in your mission and your values, then you can do miracles with that. So
I want to focus on that for a little bit, because Hillard Heintze and even now S2Verify, there is what Hillard Heintze did was some remarkable work in helping police departments evolve just a little bit. And you talk so much about how that all comes down to leadership and communication, and how you helped some police departments that were in some trouble kind of evolve into focusing on leadership and communication and integrating more effectively with their communities. And you've done that with S2Verify also. You've got awards for customer service, and you're doing background checks on people. Background checks are not always accurate, and you've got a great process for allowing people to defend themselves. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process there?
So as a background screening organization, you have an obligation to ensure that you're only giving information that is guided by the regulations and the Fair Credit Reporting Act, EEOC, the FTC. So there's a lot of governance over that aspect. And, S2Verify has been able, through our team, our experts that, are conducting this work, we built just a fabulous reputation and are growing rather rapidly. We completed our first acquisition this past year, and we're doing great things with social and digital media marketing today. As you know so good and well, because you were so generous with your time, you joined me on our podcast, which, we kind of focus in on the HR segment, because human resources professionals, are absolutely the primary consumer of the work that we do at S2 Verify. So we want to make sure we're addressing their needs, that we're attentive to what they need and how they need it and when they need it. So we're doing great work on timing. We can actually, most of our results are done within 12 to 24 hours. So some really good work product there.
And, timing for applicants now, the war for talent, I know you know this, is, people are trying to keep the people they want and they're trying to hire. I don't have a client that is not hiring. And so you have to be quick and responsive. And HR staffs are typically run very lean. Yep. So it's really important to be accurate and responsive. Also, I think to be able to assess the risk. There's always a risk to bring somebody on.
Because if you hire an individual that has questionable character, integrity, and reputation, that could destroy your whole brand. And you could be a multi-billion-dollar organization. One bad hire can really have a significant impact on you.
It can. And it's important. One of the things that I think you've done so well, and you touched on it with the digital marketing, is figuring out the balance of technology and human interaction. And I think the human interaction often gets lost nowadays. I feel a little old when I say that, but I think when there's a challenge, a person would still like to talk to another person in a reasonable time frame.
You know what? You're so right on that point, because any relevant organization doing background screening work has to leverage technology and has to leverage process. So one of the key differences for us is we're leveraging some of the world's best technology and gathering this information, but we've got human experts that are interjecting themselves in that process and are verifying and substantiating the information we're finding. And so before any information is shared with a client, we've kind of cleaned it. We've washed it out to make sure they're getting the precise information they're allowed to by law, and that the information that relates to that specific individual that we've done the background on.
And that it's accurate. I think that's so, when I was poking around your website in doing some preparation, you do have a mechanism, a very clear mechanism for somebody to dispute an issue in their background check. And I don't think that's overly common.
Well, it's required by law. But you're right. Does everybody on their website say they do that? No, they don't. But it's really incumbent on the background screening company to make sure that they're communicating with the individuals they're doing backgrounds on, that they have a right to review and challenge the information.
And what your whole life has been spent in risk assessment and risk strategy. And for us, we love clients that understand risk, right? Because in my world, risk is calculated a little bit differently than in your world. And there are things to be concerned about and things really just not to be concerned about. But it's fun for us to have those conversations. How do you best guide your clients, your HR clients, who typically are very conservative in hiring decisions and assessment? What's important and what's not?
Yeah, I think one of the first steps is with the HR professionals in an organization is making sure they have a full understanding on how they're going to make decisions. So it's not the background screening company making a decision whether somebody's you're hiring is good or bad. It's the company and their internal decision matrix that they want to apply to not just all candidates, but to individual candidates for specific jobs, because the rules and requirements that you might put around background screening for an individual that's going to work in your finance department are going to be quite different than the ones you want to put maybe around your cleaning staff, your support staff, like that. So because you have a higher expectation that you want to make sure those that have the keys to the money are making sure that they have that good character, integrity, and reputation. So
How do you, maybe a better thing to ask is, do you have an opinion on allowing people to be stupid when they're young? All I have to say is thank God the internet didn't exist when I was 25. I'm pretty sure I'm not alone.
Right.
How do you allow people to evolve from that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because people are going to make mistakes in life, right? So the great news with, background screening is that, government leaders that have, and organizations that have put compliance rules and regulations and laws over this process, and as well as individual states, depending on the state you live in, you can either look back at 5 years, 7 years, 10 years of criminal records, and not just criminal records, but it's got to be conviction information. So the challenge that you have is some organizations think they can just get information related to criminal arrest, but they can't make decisions on that legally. In most situations, there are some exceptions, I think, with that area, but by and large, it has to be conviction information. So
I think that's very important for people on both sides of that equation to understand. Right.
So I think to your question, the point that I was trying to make with that answer there was, an individual that makes a mistake when they're 18 or 20 years old, that is going to be old news by the time they're 27, 28. That will be a thing of the past. And employers are going to be able to make decisions as they matured in life and became much more responsible citizens.
Right.
So I think that's a good, I think those are great regulations that help, individuals and help protect their rights there.
One of the things that I hear in everything that you say, and I took it from our last conversation, and I see it in some interviews that I've read about you and in some of my research, is that transparency is very important to you. And I think we're in this weird time where, on the one hand, we want everything to be transparent, and on the other hand, we want nothing to be transparent. Can you talk a little bit about how valuable transparency is and how important it is to leadership?
Yeah, transparency is just one of the critical elements, I think, of that any leader needs to possess. But there's others as well. Empathy. You've got to have a strong sense of empathy for individuals and be able to help them through difficult times. So transparency helps in the concept of, when you're working with your teams, and doesn't mean you need to tell them all the secrets that, maybe you need to run behind the scene, but be honest with people about decisions you have to make in the organization, especially when it impacts the employee. Mm-hmm. And so I believe in a lot of transparency there. I'm not saying that you just open the kimono and all of a sudden everybody's got all the information, because you can't run a business like that. But you can be open, transparent, and show some empathy in how you engage with your employees.
I think it's very important. We deal with organizations that have 20 employees and 200 and 500 and 3,200 and, everything in between. And what we found is that the leaders that are most open about what is happening, and again, it doesn't mean you say everything, right? Their businesses tend to run more smoothly and more profitably. And I do think there's something to the cleaning person saying, you have an issue over here, and somebody paying attention to that. Yeah. Because we get great ideas that way. I mean, we're a much smaller team, but we all are throwing it in the pot, and we found that works better for us.
And that's so true, because any business is going to operate better the more insight you gather from your team, mm-hmm. the more perspective, the more opinions you allow into the process, and it's going to make you more informed. And I think you can call it open door, you can have it 360, however you want to phrase it, but allowing the thoughts, opinions, and perspective of your coworkers to kind of flush up, and where leadership can hear and pay attention to those issues are critically important.
Yes. I just reviewed some surveying for one of our clients, and the feedback was remarkable in its candor, and some of it was so incredibly astute. And I think that's a huge gift that an employee can give you.
Yep. When you have employees that are recognizing that says volumes about leadership, and it says really all you need to know about how companies run.
Yes, I agree with that. Is there any advice or guidance you would give an HR team in terms of new or best practices when they are doing background checks and when they are assessing risk? And how important is it to stratify that process?
Yeah. I think the critical piece is making sure the HR team has created that decision-making matrix. So if you have an individual and you need to develop these matrix, you can have them developed as an organization as a whole on the broader level, but also down to the specific job or function in the company. That it actually makes it much more relevant. Because somebody that may have been arrested and convicted for DWI, just something that, there's a number of individuals in our society that have arrests and convictions for that. Doesn't make them a bad employee, but it says that's a red flag that goes, okay, what might that person be doing for them? If they're in the transportation department, you might think twice about that, right? So it's like, okay, what were the circumstances around that conviction? It could be something as simple as the person was 21-year-old, it was their college graduation, and they were drinking that evening and they got stopped and arrested. Bad decisions on so many fronts there, but it happens. So, but if that individual is in the sales department, does that conviction exclude them from that opportunity? I can give an argument where it doesn't necessarily exclude them. Once the employer fully understands the issues there, I think that's how you make that decision matrix and understand how does that impact the company if we had that individual? Because there are some fabulous people in this nation that have some minor discretions on their criminal records.
Yep. I think we will leave it there today. I think that was a very good piece of advice. And thank you for joining me today. I know people will get a lot of value from this, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
My pleasure. Allison, I'd be delighted to join you anytime. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. For those of you that are listening, if you like this episode, leave us a review or subscribe. It helps us to spread the word, and we will see you next time.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Raising the Bar is powered by Altique Consulting, the country's leading independent expert in healthcare cost containment. Astute employers know there's a better way to offer health insurance, and we help them achieve it.